Bon lundi après-midi à tous et à toutes. J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
Good afternoon to everybody. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting number 144 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Before we begin, I would like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedbacks incidents, and we want to ensure everybody's health, more particularly, however, the health of the interpreters, whom we would like to warmly thank for their work. Pursuant to the motion adopted on Thursday, September 19, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on credit card practices and regulations in Canada. We are pleased today to welcome our witnesses from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Daniel Kelly, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. Michel Auger is also here, Senior Policy Analyst, National Affairs. Thank you. From the Center for Future Work, we're welcoming Jim Stanford, Economist and Director, who's joining us by Zoom, and I do see his name on screen. Good afternoon, Mr. Stanford. And from the People's Group Limited, and Chief Legal Officer, Ann Butler. As you know, each organization will have 5 minutes for an opening statement, which will be followed by a discussion with all of the members around the table.
With further ado, I just want to take a small moment to wish a very happy birthday to MP Perkins, whose birthday it is today. He's not listening, and it's a good thing because he didn't want it to be publicly communicated, but happy birthday, MP Perkins. And on that note, Mr. Kelly and Madame Auger, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle Dan Kelly.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Kelly. With me is my colleague Michel Auger, who is a Senior Policy Analyst. We thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about credit card fee reductions for SMEs.
CFIB's had a long history on credit card processing fees in Canada. In fact, it goes back to 2007-2008 when the credit card industry introduced premium credit cards like Visa, like higher-end Visas, higher-end MasterCards. Merchants started to see fees increase rapidly with no idea why. We took this issue to Minister Flaherty at the time and worked with him very closely to develop a code of conduct for the credit and debit card industry. In fact, it was my organization, CFIB, that wrote the first draft of the code of conduct, and we were very pleased when that was adopted with changes by the Government of Canada at the time. What that did is it put some guardrails and better practices in place. This used to be the wild, wild west in the payments industry, but it did clean up a lot of the bad practices that had been used up until that point. But it didn't serve to lower rates. We worked then with the Conservative government at the time on the first round of fee reductions, Visa and MasterCard fee reductions, and those went into effect. There was a second round when the new government, the Liberal government, took office. So two previous rounds of credit card reductions for businesses, merchants. But I have to say both of those rounds were imperfect, with much of the savings being captured by larger players in the industry, some trickling down to SMEs. And why we were so pleased about this most recent round of reductions that was announced and went into effect just a couple of weeks ago is that it is very much focused on small and medium-sized companies specifically. It is welcome news that this reduction is going. These are hundreds of millions of dollars in savings that we are hoping will hit the bottom lines of small and medium-sized companies across the country. But for this to happen, we need it to be universal and respected by the industry as a whole. I'll turn it over to Michelle for a few additional comments.
Fait que les ententes conclues avec Visa et Mastercard constituent une victoire
significative. The agreements reached with Visa and Mastercard, which are a significant victory for our members, but there's still work to be done. With Visa, we believe that depending on a sector and card type, rates should drop by 25 to 35%, with savings between $300,000 and $400,000 or $100,000 in sales. Our data shows that 56 of our members are eligible for Visa discounts, and with Mastercard, we are expecting to decrease by approximately 20% with savings of $200 per $100,000 in sales. So data shows that 66 of our members will be eligible for MasterCard discounts. While these changes represent an important first step in easing the financial burden on small businesses, we also hope that the agreement will include other credit card companies such as American Express. Aware that this reduction is aimed specifically at small businesses, we took the initiative in late summer to send a letter to the major acquirers and suppliers to ensure that the savings were passed on to small merchants. I'll turn the floor over back to Don.
Look, the agreement and even the code are not perfect measures, but this structure has largely worked, and it has delivered benefits both in the past and in present day to small businesses. And Michelle, as Michelle noted, our primary focus right now is ensuring that that all acquirers, all processors, pass on the savings to small firms. Stripe is the only processor that has publicly shared that it will not pass on the savings to small firms so far. And while we appreciate their transparency, this is absolutely unacceptable. In earlier rounds, other acquirers, I will say in the first and second round of fee reductions, other processors did try to hang on to some of the savings themselves and not pass them on to small businesses. But we worked with both the Conservative and Liberal government at the time to bring them back to the altar, to get them to reduce their fees as was promised. And it generally worked. And we need the public pressure right now for Stripe to get back to the table. I will note that just over the weekend, we had confirmed for us that Shopify is now going to pass on the savings. It didn't look like they were going to at the beginning, but Shopify does use Stripe to process its transactions, and they will pass on the savings, whether it is a Shopify doing that on its own or whether they've negotiated a special arrangement with Stripe is unsure to me at this moment, but it is good news that many small merchants using Shopify will now see the savings today. But if Stripe is allowed to get away with not passing on the savings, we believe that other processors will begin to raise their fees to make up the difference. And given that one of Stripe's board members is the chair of the governing party's task force on economic growth, this sends a very worrisome message to the payments community, and we take it at CFIB extremely seriously. I believe that everyone in the payments community would agree that my organization, CFIB, has become the main enforcement agency for the Code of Conduct and the 3 rounds of Visa and MasterCard rate reductions. We're happy to take on this role, but we're counting on your committee and all parliamentarians to help ensure these structures and the agreements are respected. Thanks so much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kelly. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Stanford.
Thank you. I would now like to turn the floor over to Mr. Stanford for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. Let me begin by outlining some of the aggregate data regarding the scale of the problem of consumer debt in Canada and why excessive interest payments on that debt are contributing to the financial distress that so many households are experiencing. Since interest rates began rising in Canada in March 2022, credit card debt has become the fastest growing major source of new debt for Canadian households. As of August this year, Canadian households were carrying $109 billion in outstanding debt on credit cards issued by the chartered banks, including broader measures of credit card debt, including non-bank cards. Total credit card debt was higher, $122 billion. Overall, non-mortgage consumer debt totaled $770 billion the same month. Now, we all know that mortgage debt, of course, constitutes the largest share of total consumer debt in Canada, $2.2 trillion. But credit card debt and other forms of non-mortgage debt are an important contributor to the overall indebtedness of Canadian households. And since interest rates are higher on non-mortgage debt than on mortgages, the debt service burden is proportionately worse. It seems that many Canadian households, hard-pressed by the increase in mortgage interest rates, are increasingly turning to their credit cards to help cover monthly expenses. Consumer interest payments on non-mortgage debt reached over $60 billion at an annualized rate as of the second quarter of this year. That's an increase of $25 billion per year, or over 70%, since interest rates started rising in early 22. And as a share of household disposable income, non-mortgage interest payments, including on credit cards, have increased by 1 full percentage point of disposable income to 3.25% by the second quarter. Again, that is not as dramatic as the increase in mortgage interest costs, which more than doubled in the same time. But non-mortgage consumer debt charges have become a significant and secondary source of the financial stress facing Canadian households. And this burden is more concentrated among lower income Canadians, most of whom do not own a home and therefore do not face those higher mortgage interest charges. Some of this trend in rising non-mortgage interest costs, of course, reflects macroeconomic developments, monetary policy, obviously, beyond the purview of this committee. But that rapid growth in non-mortgage debt charges and their regressive distributional effects attest to the importance of enhancing transparency, fairness, and choice for consumers. And thus, I commend this committee for your inquiry. I also commend some of the initial steps taken by the federal government in pursuit of those goals of transparency, fairness, and choice, such as reducing the criminal rate of interest, strengthening enforcement of predatory lending practices and criminal interest, helping to negotiate reduced credit card fees for small business, as Mr. Kelly just reported, and exploring options to expand access to low-cost and no-cost banking services. I think these measures need to go further. Specifically, I would recommend some of the following steps. Strengthening responsible lending rules and enforcement of those rules for credit card lending and also other forms of non-bank consumer lending, such as the various buy now, pay later schemes, which are popping up all over, to ensure that consumers are not provided access to more credit than is feasible for them, given their incomes and interest rates. Second, requiring all chartered banks to provide access to low-cost and no-cost accounts, not just those that have agreed to do so, following that $4 monthly fee model to a broader range of customers, including lower-income Canadians of all ages, not just the specified groups such as young people and GIS recipients currently covered. I also think we should require chartered financial institutions to contribute proportionately to establishing and capitalizing and operating a new nationwide nonprofit small value lending agency to provide short-term and emergency loans to low-income Canadians on a cost recovery basis. And there's some promising experiments in the nonprofit sphere and in other countries to show that this would make a viable alternative to the terrible exploitation experienced through payday loan firms and other predatory lenders. I would like to see the criminal interest rate reduced further for credit cards, retail loans, and other non-mortgage lending to 2% per month, or about 27% per year on an effective annual basis. And we need to strengthen transparency and advertising rules for credit cards, retail loans, buy now, pay later schemes, and other non-mortgage lending. Let me conclude, committee members, with a brief remark about the role of financial literacy in the broader effort to protect low-income Canadians against these practices. Coincidentally, today is the launch of Financial Literacy Month in Canada, sponsored by the FCAC and partner organizations. I'm a big believer in financial literacy. I served for many years as a volunteer director of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education. Certainly, consumers need to be fully informed about effective interest rates and other terms and fees in credit card loans, payday loans, and other forms of expensive credit. But frankly, we cannot count on financial literacy efforts to protect consumers against unfair practices. People are driven to participate in these schemes through desperation more than through lack of knowledge. And clearly, we need stronger regulations to limit unfair practices rather than adopting a borrower beware, blame the victim, inform yourself kind of approach. And therefore, also stronger efforts to prevent Canadians from experiencing the sorts of financial distress and desperation that drive them to excessive consumer debt, including through predatory channels, is also critical for protecting Canadians against burdensome levels of unsecured personal debt. Thank you again for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Merci, Monsieur Stanford. Madame Butler, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. Ms. Butler, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear in front of the committee as part of its study on credit card practices and regulations in Canada. My name is Ann Butler, and I'm the Chief Legal Officer for People's Trust Company, People's Bank of Canada and their subsidiaries, which carry on business collectively under the brand name People's Group. People's Group has been providing tailored financial services to the Canadian marketplace for more than 35 years. We have over 500 employees across the country in Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, and Montreal. People's Trust Company and People's Bank of Canada are federally regulated financial institutions overseen by the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. As a federal financial institution, we are subject to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada's Financial Consumer Protection Framework, and People's Trust is also regulated provincially and is subject to consumer protection regulation across the country. People's Group provides residential and commercial mortgage lending, embedded finance services, and deposits to customers in Canada. Through our subsidiaries, People's Card Services and People's Payment Solutions, we provide payment solutions to fintechs and other payment service providers across the country. People's Group's roots are in multifamily residential mortgage lending. We provide commercial mortgage funding to multifamily landlords, real estate investors, developers, seniors facility operators, and nonprofit affordable housing societies in communities across the country. We also provide single-family residential mortgages through a network of independent brokerages. From our roots in multifamily residential mortgage lending, we've grown to become an important enabler for domestic and global fintechs in the Canadian market, providing them with banking and payment services and helping them to provide innovative financial products and services to Canadians. We are a strong supporter of financial innovators, underscoring our fundamental belief that a strong and competitive ecosystem will foster the development of new financial products and services and innovative ways of delivering them for the benefit of Canadian customers and businesses. As the largest issuer of prepaid cards in the country, we have helped our customers launch products and services that have expanded access to digital financial services for Canadians. We also have a thriving merchant acquiring sponsorship business in which we sponsor and act as the settlement bank for independent sales organizations, which we call ISOs, in their delivery of payment acceptance capabilities to their merchant customers across the country. Given this committee's focus, I would like to now explain the role of Peoples in the payments ecosystem. I will focus on the acquiring side of the business, which I believe is most relevant to the committee's current work. People's Group's role in merchant acquiring side of the credit card business is relatively unique compared to the role played by most financial institutions that might appear before you. People's Group acts as a sponsor bank for ISOs. We act as their acquiring bank, enabling them to contract directly with merchants and use us as the settlement bank for payments processed through the credit card networks on behalf of those merchants. In this model, our ISOs are responsible for signing up merchants and for offering merchants payment processing services and often equipment to process card transactions. People's Group does not provide payment processing services directly to merchants. We provide ISOs with sponsored access to credit card network processing systems, for instance, Visa and MasterCard, and we act as their settlement bank. In this capacity, Peoples is an acquirer, as defined in the Code of Conduct for the payments card industry. For this reason, we require that our ISOs as downstream participants comply with the Code of Conduct obligations, as well as the payment card network operator rules. Peoples has no direct role in setting the prices that ISOs charge to their merchants. This is determined by the ISO based on a variety of factors and varies from ISO to ISO. All interchange fees charged to People's Group by the card networks are passed along by People's Group entirely to ISOs for payment. The ISO determines whether or how to factor in those charges in the overall pricing to their downstream merchants. People's Group's compensation for acting as the acquiring bank is through a fee paid by ISOs for the use of our services. Typically, this is calculated as basis points on gross payment flows through the account. Interchange rates or fees do not play a role in the compensation Peoples receives from the ISOs. I hope my explanation has helped the committee to understand People's Group's unique position within the Canadian financial system as an important enabler of financial innovation for Canadians. People's Group appreciates the opportunity to appear here today and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. And so to start the discussion, I'll turn it over to MP Patzer.
Thank you very much to everybody for attending today. I'm going to start off with CFIB, if that's all right. Mark Carney is a special advisor to the Liberal Party, but we all know that he's advising the Prime Minister, and he is the de facto finance minister of this government. He also happens to be sitting on the board of Stripe, as you were allocated to or alluded to earlier, and he's also said that they will not be passing on savings to consumers through a government-led initiative. So given that you guys represent small businesses that would stand to benefit from these cost savings, do you have any thoughts on Mr. Carney effectively saying no to his own government's initiative?
It is bizarre that we are in this situation where we have somebody who is a special advisor to the governing party that is also serving on the board of a company that is in direct conflict with a stated objective and promise from the government of which he is currently associated. I have to tell you, I understand what a board member on a board of directors does, but this is super awkward. And I got to tell you, our bigger worry is for those, for all of the other acquirers. Watch closely what is happening. And if this is allowed to stand, if Stripe does not change gears and actually flow the discounts that it is supposed to small merchants, the whole process is going to fall apart. So whether it is Stripe, its board, Mr. Carney, somebody needs to move here and make this happen. This is the Deputy Prime Minister that has said in a recent statement that it is the expectation of the Government of Canada that all participants in the ecosystem will pass on these savings down to the small businesses that deserve these savings. And now we have a party that is not doing that with this very close connection to the same players. It is really outrageous.
Yeah, it really is. And this is the deputy finance minister who's trying to stave off a competitor for her own job. That's for sure. One more question for you here, and just kind of getting back to the whole point about cost to payment processors here. Like I talked to a couple small businesses back home in Swift Current, and one of them, when it's busy season, they pay over $7,000 a month just alone in their fees. Like that. That's crazy. That's almost three. They could hire three full-time employees yet, albeit for minimum wage or just above, but they could hire 3 full-time employees. Would not be incumbent on them to make sure that people are adhering to these new initiatives?
Absolutely. And look, I will say that this isn't the first time we've seen this. There were, when the Conservative government put the first round of credit card fee reductions in place after negotiating it with Visa and MasterCard, there were a couple of processors that did decide not to pass them on. But I will tell you that we, CFIB, worked closely with Minister Flaherty's office at the time. I think it was also in the transition to Joe Oliver. And those savings ultimately were passed on after some pressure from both the finance minister's office and externally from us. That's what my expectation is for this round, and I'm waiting to see that happen at this point in time. To your point about this aggregate savings, I've talked to tons of small business owners who say they pay more in credit card processing fees than they take home from their business themselves. That's how big a fee this is, a cost this is to SMEs.
Crazy. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Genereux here now.
Merci, Mr. Patzer. Madame Auger, j'aimerais qu'on revienne sur ce que
Ms.
vous venez de
Auger,
dire en anglais.
I'd like to come back to what you said in English and French, if we could.
Carney sur le board
The
of
fact that
directors
Mr. Carney is on the board of directors of Stripe
est en contradiction, même en conflit d'intérêts,
stands in contradiction, in fact, in conflict of interest with the current government's policies, given that he's special advisor to the government. Yes, that's in fact. Well, as you've mentioned, there is a conflict of interest. It's a bit odd to see this. And it isn't necessarily what we wanted to see at the end of the day. But if Stripe were to pass on the reductions as other acquirers in the industry, then it is disappointing that they have taken that decision. Even though they may be honest, it is disappointing for the SMEs who are customers of that organization. But when you think about the payment ecosystem, Minister Freeland said that everybody should respect the rules, so it's all the more disappointing to see that some companies decide not to pass on these savings to the consumers. Last week, we heard from the Association of Retailers in Canada. They will not necessarily see that reduction of transaction fees as announced by the government. What do you think about that? I imagine that some of them are members of your organization. Well, what I said is that, yes, it is a victory. It's a step in the right direction to see that there are many SMEs in Canada that will benefit from the reductions, but we know that some of our members, in fact, many of them will not have access to this because the thresholds are not high enough. What would be the percentage of companies that won't benefit? Please go ahead.
So in our data at CFIB, we calculated exactly how many businesses will be under the threshold with Visa and MasterCard and how many will be over. So 60% of our members roughly will see the reductions because they are under those thresholds. And about 40% of our members will not see the reductions because they are more sizable small firms. But it is a good, I will add that like any time government has put in place any kind of threshold or rule, it never in its first year delivers benefits to 100%. We have a $500,000 corporate tax threshold. We have a $1 million lifetime capital gains exemption. And our goal as an advocacy organization is to see those thresholds raised each year. But this is good news for the majority of small and medium-sized companies, and we receive it as good news. And it's sad that this one aspect of it is going to prevent it from being delivered to a good number of small firms, and that's why we need to make we need to get that reversed.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Turnbull. La parole est à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. You have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I have questions for all of you, but I'm just maybe off the top, I wanted to just mention that in multiple committee testimonies that Stripe had confirmed that its board actually was not involved in any of the decision making. So I think that's important to just mention on the record. But I wanted to pick up where we left off. Last week I had a really great exchange with the gentleman, Sylvain Charlebois, from Dalhousie University, who's known sometimes as the food professor. And what was interesting is that we actually came to an agreement where he agreed with comments that I had made about climate change being the number one challenge and the biggest driver for food price volatility, but also he said that it was actually the biggest threat to the agri-food sector. Mr. Stanford, I wonder if you have any views on this, whether climate change is the biggest threat to the agri-food sector and driving food price volatility.
Thank you, sir. I would certainly agree that climate change is one of the major disruptors in our overall productive and macroeconomic system, including, obviously, the food industry. We've seen impacts of climate disasters in various parts of the world, including Canada, on agricultural supply chains, food deliveries, and food prices. So, whether it's more important than some of the other crises we face these days is probably a matter of judgment. There's a lot of instability and uncertainty out there, but certainly climate change has had a very negative impact on food supply chains and food prices.
Thank you very much. Can you maybe just speak for a moment? And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's related to, I think, the food prices that Canadians feel like we often hear, especially conservatives, stand up in the House of Commons and talk about food prices as being a key concern that Canadians have. I certainly hear that in my community too, so I don't disagree that food prices are something that Canadians are still feeling a lot of households pressure around. And so I wanted to ask you though, there are some individuals that keep claiming that carbon pricing is having a bigger impact on food prices than I think is merited given the data. And in fact, perhaps climate change is actually having a bigger impact on food prices, perhaps. But I wanted to go back to this carbon pricing issue because it comes up a lot in our daily conversations in the House of Commons. So, Mr. Stanford.
Just 1 second, Mr. Turnbull. I have a point of order from Mr. Massey.
I know that we have a wide scope of trying to deal with this, but I noticed last meeting and this meeting, and perhaps we're getting really far away from credit card costs and so forth. I think it's important to give the parliamentary secretary credit for raising an important issue, but if it could be at least tied into somehow credit card and the expenses of consumers, I don't want to, dissuade discussion on anything, but at the same time, we're getting into food pricing and carbon from a number of different members here, and I'll leave it at that, but I think the last meeting was almost predominantly taken up by that argument.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Massey. It's a good point. However, I'll say regarding last meeting that we had a witness who, in his testimony, talked about the idea of buying food now and paying later as it pertains to credit card rates and so on and so forth. I think that opened the door. But I will ask members to try to remind themselves of the topic of this particular study, though I've been pretty lenient with everyone across the aisle. So. Monsieur Garon, voulez-vous intervenir ou
Mr. Garon? Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add something, and with all due respect to my colleague, I understand that it may appear that we're swaying from the topic of our study, but first of all, let me say that I agree with your remarks. But we also have witnesses here who do lobbying. The CFIB, for example, they are lobbying the government to abolish the carbon tax. So in that context, I think it's absolutely appropriate to allow our colleagues to continue with this line of questioning. Mr. Garon? Thank you for that comment, and Mr. Massey as well. I would prefer the members to use their time as they wish, so I let Mr. Bathieu speak about the subject for some 10 minutes. So I think it is up to each member to see how you wish to use your time, all the while staying as closely tied to the subject as possible.
If I could just wrap up, I just wanted to get your view on whether there's a correlation between carbon pricing and food price inflation. Can you maybe comment on that? Because it seems like there's a lot of overblown statements made in the House of Commons, in my view.
In other research that I've done, sir, and that is published on our Center for Future Work's website, I've shown there's no empirical correlation between the carbon price in Canada and the rate of inflation, period, including inflation on food items. And I have identified other factors that are certainly more culpable in high food prices, including the fact that retail profit margins in the grocery industry have more than doubled and stayed unusually high since the pandemic. So I would conclude that carbon pricing is not relevant to the food price challenges that many Canadians have been facing.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. Maybe now more to the point of credit card pricing and interchange fees. Mr. Kelly, you had said, or actually I think it was Ms. Auger, I hope I said that right, that 66% of your members were eligible for the interchange fee reductions that our government negotiated with Visa and MasterCard. How much would the savings be, or would we expect for small firms for every $100,000 in Visa and MasterCard sales? Could you speak to that? Or Mr. Kelly?
Sure. So what we mentioned is that for Visa, we're thinking it's about a 25 to 35 reduction economy savings. So we're thinking about $300 or $400 by 100,000 in annual sales. So that's 56% of our members based on our data. And then for MasterCard, we're seeing, we estimate about 20% reductions, which is about $200 for each 100,000 in annual sales. And that's about 66% of our members based on our data.
When you look at it as a whole, most firms that have about $1 million in sales, total sales or lower, we feel will qualify for the savings. So credit cards are, of course, a big part of retail sales, but they're not the only way in which consumers pay. Debit, of course, is low cost in Canada, thank goodness. So we have good rates there. But yeah, you could expect perhaps as a small merchant, if you have a few $100,000 in savings, you might save $1,000, $1,200 a year. So it's not going to change your life, but it certainly is nice to see one cost come down, especially when you're facing so many cost increases on other lines of your budget.
So if you have $1 million in sales, you'd get approximately $3,000 to $4,000 in savings or less, depending on whether you're with Visa or MasterCard?
It is hard to say, of course, because it does absolutely depend on the volume you have with Visa, the volume with MasterCard. The reductions are different between the two companies. But I would say safely, if you're at kind of the maximum level of sales, 300,000 with Visa, 175,000 with MasterCard, you might save $1,500, perhaps 2,000 at the outside. And that's for in-store sales. If your sales are primarily online, the savings are very small. They're going to be a fraction of that, about 10 basis points, or 0.1 of 1%.
And that's because of what?
The reductions the savings are very much front-end loaded to in-store transactions. There was, and I'm pleased with it, there was a small reduction that was negotiated between the Government of Canada and Visa and MasterCard for e-commerce, but those savings are much more modest. That has been the fees for e-commerce are dramatically higher than they are. If you use Stripe, for example, I think they charge 2.9% of the sale plus 30 cents per transaction. So almost 3% of your sale is going every time there's an e-commerce transaction. That's a lot of money.
Thanks. And maybe just a quick comment. I know I'm wrapping up here, but I know that CFIB had advocated for the Canada carbon rebate for small businesses. I know that that's in addition to the interchange fee reductions that we've negotiated. I feel like these are two big wins for our small businesses across Canada. 600,000 businesses getting $2.5 billion, that's going to go out between December 15th and the end of December. Can you comment on that, Mr. Kelly?
Sure. Look, we are very relieved that after 5 years of steady pressure, the government is finally going to be passing on the money that it owes small businesses in the carbon rebate back to those small businesses. It is not an insignificant amount of money, but the only reason it is so big is because the Government of Canada has sat on this for 5 straight years. It's going out this December. The timing is good. I'm very pleased that small businesses are finally going to get back the money, but I will say, as Monsieur Guérin mentioned a second ago, unfortunately, because of what has happened and the delays in getting this money back, now a total of 82% of our members oppose the carbon tax fully and want to see it gone.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Turnbull. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Garon, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being with us today. We're not going to speak about the carbon tax because that federal tax does not apply to Quebec, so I'll leave it up to the provinces and territory to enjoy talking about this. This said, however, and I've mentioned this a number of times in committee, saying that there's an agreement between Visa, MasterCard, and the federal government, it seems to be a bit of a misnomer. It's not an agreement. We have a government that threatened to legislate and a government that stepped back. There was no agreement. What was done is that it was simply a useless act, and they allowed the credit cards to basically do whatever they wished. But it was necessary to regulate. For example, we followed the Association of Corner Stores that said that it affects some of their members. I know it affects some of yours. We also had the Quebec Council for Retail Businesses that asked the federal government to intervene, and we've read the documents, and that clearly shows that you have the same concerns as everybody else. But at the same time, you want to continue to talk about code of conduct and something that basically bypasses the government's regulatory authority. And I'm surprised because the government has not regulated in the last few years and months, has completely waived its responsibilities. At the same time, here you are, you're attacking an advisor to the Prime Minister. I simply don't understand this. And the fact that rather than coming to committee and launch a war because somebody who is sitting on the board of directors of a company that's based in the United States that didn't pass on this reduction, is that not the evidence that maybe it shows that regulations have to be put in place, so maybe this is not the right path?
Thank you so much for the question. Look, there is no perfect road anywhere in the world on this file. We followed closely the situation in Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, where there in fact is regulation, price regulation for the credit card industry. The EU, for example, has a cap of 30 basis points, so 0.3 of 1% on credit card transactions. But that isn't what the small business pays in Europe. When I've spoken to small business owners in France in my travels, for example, they're paying dramatically higher rates than the regulated amount. And one of the challenges with command and control regulation is that banks typically aren't the type of people who just say, oops, we lost $1 billion. Oh, well, we'll just move on. The history has shown that if they're looking for this, they'll look for the revenue elsewhere in other fees, and that's exactly what happened in these other markets. And it's what convinced, I think, Jim Flaherty, when he was finance minister, that we needed a different tool in Canada, and that's why we proposed the Code of Conduct.
Si vous me permettez, parce que le temps...
Of course.
If I may, because we have little time, I understand the approach. I'm not criticizing so much as trying to understand. I understand you spoke about Flaherty, you were involved in the Code of Conduct, and by the way, this is good work. But the word has changed. Let me give you an example, because when we saw the fintechs arrive with the Code of Conduct, for example, the fact that you could repair cars, there used to be a code of conduct between the main automakers where you would do a diagnosis. You had a kind of open system. Now, new companies came in. You had Tesla, just to name but a few, that produce electrical cars, and the systems have changed. And finally, they said, well, we want to penetrate into the market. We're not interested in a code of conduct. And what it does is it undermines the system. Stripe came in, and you're telling us that the code of conduct is not something of interest to them. But there's not just Stripe. We also have the FinTech Association, and that involves many small firms. It's not Visa, MasterCard, American Express. It's all kinds of folks. And they told us, look, if you do this and that, we're going to look elsewhere. We're simply not interested in your code of conduct, and we won't in any case honor them. We'll bypass them. So they told us this directly. Isn't that the evidence, perhaps, that the approach you've applied, was put in place years ago? Maybe it should be reviewed. Maybe we should consider regulations as all the other associations are asking for, except for yours.
I do respect the other associations that have pursued more of a regulatory approach. My point is, though, that those approaches, where applied elsewhere in the world, haven't been perfect either. You're absolutely right, though, this is messy. And our view is the best thing that can happen right now is to make sure that we get these companies that are not following the rules as has been laid out, the expectations that have been laid out, is to get them back to the altar by applying both political pressure and applying external pressure, like the beating that we are giving Stripe every day in the media and advertising with small businesses. That, in my opinion, is what's going to get them back to the table. I will say Square, during one of the previous rate reductions, I can't remember if it was the one under the Conservatives or Liberals, but Square did not pass on the savings to small firms. We freaked out. There were some phone calls made, and then they moved.
Maintenant, si je peux me permettre, vous conviendrez que, puis j'aurai une dernière question pour vous, si
I have a next to last question for you. But from the viewpoint of a parliamentarian, to have an association come here and simply attack somebody who is close to the Prime Minister, who sits on a board, and saying that it's unacceptable, and to tell us that we're not even asking the Prime Minister to regulate, from a consistency point of view, it's quite unique. So let's you've spoken about the credit cards in Europe. As you know, in the EU, the credit cards don't work as they do here in North America. But let's say USA, the UK, New Zealand, and the Fed in the United States also recommended regulation. When you look at the interchange rates in the OCDE countries, Canada is about halfway through, in the middle of the pack. But those whose fees are lower than ours have regulations in place, and those generally whose fees are higher than ours do not have regulations. Does that not, in a sense, contradict your approach, under which you're saying, well, we're going to simply work with these firms who don't agree with us in the media and who don't agree with the code of conduct? Do you have some kind of openness with respect to the need to eventually have regulations?
Our official position at CFIB has never been to oppose outright regulation. Look, our view has been, just as we apply to small businesses, regulation isn't always the answer. It's often what governments look to first. But we think about it from a small business perspective. We don't love it when government just jumps in with command and control regulations right away. You try other instruments first, and if those don't work, then, of course, regulation remains an option for government in these instances. The only piece I would challenge, though, is that while the posted rate, the advertised rate, is in Europe 30 basis points, that is not the effective rate that is paid by small companies. The benefits are construed primarily to large merchants, and small firms have other fees that are added on by other players in the marketplace that mean that the rates are not dramatically different than they are in Canada right now. So it is not a panacea. Regulation is not a panacea for small firms, and that's my point. But is there an openness on our part? Yes, there is.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Garon. Je passerai maintenant
Thank you,
la parole à
Mr.
Monsieur
Garon.
Massé.
I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Massé.
And before I start my questioning, I just want to leave it to your opinion, Chair. There's been recent developments on the file that we're going to have the Rogers CEO come, and I'm wondering whether there's, kind of the ability for you to ask without a new motion whether we can also get Bell, BCE, Mirko Bibic, and also Executive Director Darren Entwistle from TELUS to appear at the same time as well, since they're in the same position.
Yeah, so just so I understand, and just to be clear, colleagues, we passed a motion to invite the CEO of Rogers before November 1st, but we passed the motion almost close to November, on October 31st, if I'm not mistaken. CEO was confirmed for the 28th. So what Mr. Massé is proposing is that without going through the formal process of a motion, that we add to the witnesses that we want to hear from Bell and TELUS ideally on the same date, because that would be for just one meeting. So that would be for the clerk to work through. But that's what Mr. Massé is proposing. If I have unanimous consent, I can expend, but I'm looking around the table and I don't have unanimous consent. So Mr. Massé, then if you can come back with a motion next meeting.
Sure, I'll do that. I'm surprised that the parliamentary secretary would deny TELUS and BCE to come in here, but I don't know what their motives are anyway, so that's okay. And I guess I'll move to my question to Mr. Stanford. With regards to the testimony, the reason I raised this situation about point of order in terms of relevancy, it's not that climate change and carbon tax and all those different things can impact the cost of groceries. That's obvious in many respects, but it dissuades from the real problem that we have here is what I've advocated for, Mr. Stanford, is a review over the borrowing practices and the cost of those borrowing practices of Canadians. And specific is that credit cards are now being used for essentials. They have high rates of interest on them, whereas, say, for example, at least a mortgage has a lower interest rate. Your concerns are well vetted in terms of the debt now on people. But my concern and question to you is, have we seen a shift of borrowing practices that Canadians have to do just to get by? And if we're leaving them in the situation...
Un instant. Sorry, Mr. Massé, il y a un appel au règlement.
Il n'y a pas de traduction.
Il semblerait que la traduction...
We apparently don't have any interpretation.
The French translation is not working. I'm testing it right now. Mr. Garon, still no translation.
Quand je vais vous comprendre, je vais vous le dire. Oh! C'est reparti.
So, it's back. C'est reparti. Merveilleux. Ça fonctionne, d'accord. Merci. Mes excuses, Monsieur Garon et Monsieur
That
Massé.
seems to be working. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Garon. So real quickly, Mr. Stanford, is there a change in borrowing practices for Canadians in their purchasing and then having to move to the highest rates of borrowing, not lines of credit, not mortgages, not even car loans, which are lower, but moving those issues to credit cards. Isn't there an obligation for government to regulate some of those rates, or at least consider the consequences on consumers as they move those purchases to costs that might be higher for them to borrow at?
Yes, sir, you're quite right. There has been a shift in overall non-mortgage borrowing towards credit cards. And as I noted in my opening remarks, outstanding credit card debt, even just on the chartered banks cards, has grown by about a third since the Bank of Canada started increasing interest rates in early 2022. Much faster than mortgage debt itself. And obviously with mortgage debt becoming so expensive, the number of new mortgages issued has slowed down. So mortgage debt is not growing rapidly, but hard-pressed households are clearly relying more on credit cards to finance their purchases. Now, which purchases are used by the credit cards and which are still paid in cash, ultimately, that doesn't matter. I'm sure that some of the credit companies like Equifax and so on can break down where the actual credit is being used, if it's at the grocery store or the appliance store or for entertainment purposes in restaurants. But ultimately, that doesn't matter because money is fungible. So the fact that they're going into credit card debt at an increasing rate is the key problem, and the interest burden on that credit card debt, as you correctly point out, is much higher than for other forms of debt. So I do think that these trends over the last 3 years certainly reinforce the necessity of your committee's inquiry and considering the full range of regulatory options, including setting maximums on the interest that can be charged, as I suggested, but also more transparency and more regulation on the fees that are built into those interest costs.
You mentioned as well, too, about financial literacy playing a role, but what we've seen, some of the testimony, is that there's also a way to stream, especially young Canadians, towards using credit cards and higher interest payments. And then we've also, like, it could be marketing done on apps and phones. And then we've also seen grocery stores move in purchasing companies to getting people to buy groceries and so forth from these high interest rate programs, say, for example, getting DoorDash or Uber Eats and all those different things all paid on those systems. Is there any concern that you might have with regards to young people and or any data or any information that you have that we're also allowing a structural change to take place in the market, is, you know, to use those high interest options versus out of low interest options, because later on people can get themselves in circumstances they never foresaw?
Oh, I think you're quite right to highlight the risk of a kind of a generational shift and a cultural shift around particularly some of these app-based systems. So young people, of course, are the early adopters of many of these new apps and new services, and many of them are tied to credit cards. Many of them are not even tied to credit cards. I'm frankly alarmed at the growth of the buy now, pay later type of schemes that have become very popular. And, again, here's where financial literacy can play a role. They're often advertised as there's no interest charge on these things, in the same way that there's no interest charge on a credit card if you pay the full balance every month. But that doesn't tell the whole story. And it also doesn't protect consumers who think, oh, this is a great way to buy all kinds of stuff, without any kind of oversight regarding their ability to repay that. So we are seeing, I think, more among young people who have less other financial resources and perhaps less access to other forms of credit, overusing these types of facilities without the same sort of due diligence over the borrower's ability to repay and capacity and stress tests that are applied to conventional forms of lending. So I think this is a gaping hole in our financial regulations, and I think it's going to end badly. But I think it's symptomatic of a broader concern that you quite rightly highlighted.
And lastly, real quickly, we heard from the banks that they don't offer any, breakdown of their profit margin on credit cards. Do you think that that's a fair expectation for Canadians to at least know the profit margin? It's a policy, so it's not actually a legislated requirement for them to hide it. It's just a policy amongst their, and miraculously, they all have the same policy.
Well, certainly, we don't expect companies to divulge more information about their proprietary business than they're absolutely required to. So I'm not surprised that none of them disclose it, but I do think they should. I think we should have more financial transparency on the sources and uses of funds through the chartered banks. They're given unique powers, but also unique responsibilities by virtue of their business, and informing Canadians over the distribution of their revenues and costs and net profits, I think is absolutely reasonable to expect.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Massé.
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Quick question to follow up on MP Massey's question for Mr. Stafford. Mr. Stafford, I have sought from the banks through this hearing to ask for the return on equity percentage, which would not betray revenue, cost structures, any of that. Would just know just how profitable they are. Do you see that as being proprietary, just having a return on equity percentage disclosed?
Well, I believe, sir, that we should be able to see that from their overall corporate financial statements, return on equity in the overall operation, but broken down according to the different divisions of it, I think is a reasonable ask. And, they obviously don't want to share any more information with their competitors than they have to. And if they're making a very strong return in one line of business, that's going to attract the attention of their competitors. So I understand why they don't want to release it. But again, my point would be chartered banks are given a very special privilege, literally the power to create money through new lending. And in return for that, they should have special responsibilities to disclose to Canadians how that power is being used.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're a government-protected oligopoly, and with that protection comes responsibilities perhaps different if it were a free and open market in financial services. Mr. Chair, I would like to resume the debate, if I could, with apologies to the witnesses, on my production order motion for MasterCard. Members will recall I moved a motion earlier in this study that production of all documents, emails, memos, materials related to the Liberal government's $50 million handout to MasterCard, including the communications between ISED, PCO, and PMO with MasterCard regarding the grant, and the committee report to the House to express its concern regarding the value for money for taxpayers on the nearly 50 million taxpayer dollars given to MasterCard by the Trudeau Liberal government. And the reason for that, of course, is that we learned in this study that they had about $26 billion of global revenue, about $11 billion of gross operating income, yet we're willing to take $50 million from the Canadian taxpayer to set up a cybersecurity center, which, of course, is sort of the ante up at the poker game. If you're going to be in a credit card business, you better be pretty careful on security and cybersecurity. And so they seemed shocked at the time, at the beginning of this study, that somebody would actually question them. I asked them if they would pay it back, since they don't seem to really need the money. And they baffled and skated and did all the things that a global company like that would do. So I would propose again that we could expedite this if we quickly voted on it and move on.
So, Mr. Perkins, you're moving it because there's no such thing as resuming debate when a meeting has been adjourned, if I'm not mistaken. So you're moving the motion. Perfect. It's been duly moved, and members had been given notice of the motion on Monday, October 7th. Are there any comments on the motion? You've, at the time, Mr. Turnbull.
Maybe I could just ask Mr. Perkins to clarify what the purpose of this is. So was it to, I think, recoup funding or something like that? Is that what you were? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's trying to find out the rationale and paper trail behind why the government would think that giving this company $50 million of taxpayer money and what special arrangements were made for something that it seems to be pretty basic to their operating business. That if they don't have protection of security and cybersecurity, they don't have a credit card business. Don't know why they need taxpayer money for that, any more than Loblaws needed money for fridges.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that this particular cybersecurity initiative, that the global payments network giant invested $510 million in this to essentially prevent cybersecurity fraud. And, it's providing 270 jobs to people. So there's significant amounts of students and cooperatives that have been created, and essentially it's enhancing our security for consumers. So I think the intention of the initiative, is my understanding, is to ensure that the security required to protect consumers is being increased over time, and that there's innovation happening with the company having invested quite a significant amount in the process. So, but what I'm trying to gain is it the opposition's intention here that somehow there's a contribution agreement that has been violated, that the terms of that agreement have been violated? Like, what would be the rationale for what is proposed here? So it says, and that the committee report to the House to express its concern regarding the value for money for taxpayers on the nearly $50 million. So is it, I guess what I'm trying to determine here is the intention to recoup those funds in some way? Like, is that what, I mean, the government grants all kinds of dollars out for various purposes, and this one is to enhance cybersecurity for payment processors. That obviously there's some benefit to that to the Canadian consumers, and a sizable number of jobs. So is that the intention?
Just before, because I understand the questions, but that's not how it works, Mr. Turnbull. You can ask your questions, but then I have a speaking order. So are you on your?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just posing the question in terms of debate. I think I can pose questions in my interventions. I wasn't suggesting that Mr. Perkins could answer right away.
I was not as much afraid as that, as Mr. Perkins is jumping in and having a back and forth between the two of you guys, as much as I enjoy it, but that's not how it works. Monsieur Garon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
L'enjeu que j'ai avec cette motion-là, c'est que
The issue I have with this motion is that it's difficult to be against virtue.
la motion laisse presque sous-entendre que le gouvernement.
The motion indicates that the government has simply wasted $50 million. Certainly, we have seen the government do this with ArriveCAN, and in other instances, we've seen them launch these kinds of projects. But the way that it is formulated, Mr. Garon,
OK, bon, c'est peut-être mes excuses, Monsieur Garon.
apparently there was no interpretation.
Pas de problème.
Well,
J'ai
that's
l'impression
fine.
que les conservateurs,
I have the sense that the conservatives are simply on a fishing expedition. In some cases, they try to fish and try to catch some fish for their election campaign. That is the sense I have, because in some cases, there were good reasons to obtain accountability. There were reasons to believe that there might have been irregularities, and we went ahead, we asked for documents, we had in-camera sessions. But in this case, it's as if we have a request for information, and at the same time, it's the end of the trial. They're asking for the emails, for documents. These are kinds of things that, first of all, you don't ask when you don't have substantial suspicions of irregularities. And then they already tell us at the end the conclusion they've arrived at. So in all of the cases where there are irregularities, where subsidies were granted when they should have not been given, where there were inappropriate contribution agreements, that's fine. I agree. But I tell you that only when it's pertinent. The leader of the official opposition said that he's against any industrial policy, any subsidy. He lives in a world where there are no other countries where competitors or others don't get subsidies. it's a very imperfect world. Perhaps often it's frustrating seeing public money go away. That is frustrating. But the role of this committee in this particular case is not to start undertaking an open trial of all companies that might have benefited from government's money to fulfill the Conservative Party's program. That is not what we're here for. So with all due respect, when the Conservatives came in, and it's the same thing for Carney the last time, I don't particularly appreciate him, but I think we have to be careful not to use committees in order to ceaselessly try people so that the committee does not become a kangaroo court as soon as somebody sees a benefit in that. So I don't see this motion having any public interest, despite the fact that it was a draft. At least we were given to understand it had been drafted. And if I'm convinced that it's useful, I vote in favor. But as long as I'm not, I do not intend to support it. Thank you, Mr. Garon. Thank you for your clear and eloquent comments. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I can propose an amendment to this motion that maybe can get us over this and back to witnesses. And sorry, Mr. Garon, this is going to be in the English version. That's because I'm on the fly here and I'm unilingual. Unfortunately, I don't have the skill of the two languages. At any rate, first sentence still in English, the same. Delete, strike out liberal, then strike out handout, and then finish with at the end of grant and grant and the committee report to the House, period, and then strike out everything else. So make it simple. Strike out liberal, strike out handout, and after grant and the committee report to the House, period, and then everybody else struck out.
Very well. Is this clear for all? Is Mr. Massey's proposal clear? As he has just explained. Could we possibly obtain a copy in both official languages? Yes, certainly. That should not take too long. Perhaps we could briefly suspend to obtain the amended version to all of the members.
I'm not sure if this would be a point of order on form or a quick comment that if Mr. Massey cuts out the word handout, it leaves it sort of with the gap of an operative word. Perhaps he'd like to suggest a word that would be less payout, grant.
Grant.
But like grant means certain things to certain. It's like spell crafting here, right? So contribution is usually commitment.
Commitment, sure, whatever. You're correct. I appreciate that. You are correct.
Would be your amendment, Mr. Massey? Okay, so we'll suspend for 2 minutes le temps que l'amendement soit distribué aux membres. C'est correct?
We'll suspend until the amendment has been distributed to all of the members. Mr. Garon, is that still necessary for you, or should we continue debating the amendment? Very well, we'll suspend for 2 minutes. And before we suspend, for our witnesses,
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins.
I'm trying to gauge whether I should let our witnesses go and not have to endure these debate on motions here at the committee. You have other motions, I believe, after. So I will then thank you all for your short, albeit very interesting testimony and presence here at the committee. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Stanford, aussi, à vous qui vous nous joignez.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford, for having joined us virtually. You are released, and I will suspend the suspended committees for a few moments. Thank you.
randomly select, a company that we don't like, and we do an investigation and order documents on everything about that company? Like, should we be looking into, like, do we all get to do that? Do we all just pick a random company? Is that the sort of thing that we do every week in this committee now, and start investigations on any company who's got a contribution of any kind that we don't particularly like? Like, I think it just turns this committee into, I know that Mr. Garon called it the kangaroo court, and I kind of, in French, which I don't know how to say in French, my apologies. But I think, it sort of struck me that that's sort of what this committee starts to become with that. So I don't agree with this. I just don't think it's a good use of the committee's time. I think if there was a really good, strong rationale for why we're looking into this, but I haven't heard that from any of the members opposite. I note that the Conservatives, I think it's just that they want to do this. They're saying, hey, this industry is profitable, therefore, who is it that benefits, by the way, from the work and the innovation done in terms of cybersecurity? Who is it that is most vulnerable and at risk? It's seniors, right? Our seniors in my riding are the ones that have said that they've been taken advantage of. They're the ones that are vulnerable and subjected to fraud and online cybersecurity threats. And I think this work really stands to benefit individuals who are using these payment processors and online tools, and they're not necessarily always that savvy in terms of digital literacy, and we can't blame them for that. They're using the tools that our modern day age offers them, and that are the most convenient. But I think that for me, this sort of, it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like the thing that this committee should be spending its time on. We have multiple other studies that we're undertaking that I think are a good use of this committee's time. I think we've come to agreements on those where, we've built some consensus around the agenda and the schedule at this committee. And I find that that's very productive. So, and then we get these sort of one-off motions. Some of them that are quite reasonable, we've said, okay, let's incorporate this into our schedule. But this one just seems like a very partisan sort of fishing expedition that just feels like it's a waste of a lot of time and resources. And I'm not sure whether that's really the intention here. I don't want to presuppose, but I just don't feel like there's a really good, strong rationale for this. And I feel like we could do this, on a whole host of companies. Just think about how many companies and initiatives are getting contributions from the federal government of some kind or another. And, is it that we would investigate every single one of them? Or is this one special for some reason? Like, what's the rationale here? No one's provided a good rationale. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Turnbull. Sur ma liste, j'ai Monsieur Patzer.
Thank you, Mr. Patter.
Mentioned MP Rampel-Garner. We're on the amendment. So I said we're creating a new list for the amendment. I had you on the list on the main motion. But if you want, I can add you to the list. Okay, but I have Mr. Patzer, MP Area, Monsieur Garon, then Madame Rampel-Garner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, Mr. Turnbull actually said it quite well right at the very end there. I mean, look at the amount of people who are getting grants and contributions from this government. I mean, it's... You wonder why it's scandal after scandal after scandal with these guys. You wonder why we're on the fourth week of the House of Commons being jammed up by the Green Slush Fund issue here. Like, it's on and on with these guys. And of course, when we see this happening over and over again, I get people back home talking to me on a regular basis. I remember when this money first went out to MasterCard at the time, I had a lot of people talk to me about the fact that why on earth would they be giving $50 million to a company that is as profitable and has as much money available to spend on things as MasterCard does. The $12 million to Loblaws for refrigerators from a very profitable company as well that was going to make those changes themselves anyways. They certainly did not need taxpayers' money in order to make those changes. So I think that's what the heart of this gets to, is the fact that you have all this money going out to corporations and to businesses that don't necessarily need it, and the fact that they did not ask to have a repayment plan as part of the contribution. The fact that it was just a straight up grant and not a loan speaks to the issues here. So these wonder, who on earth asked for this? Who initiated this? Did the government just blindly give them $50 million? When we have MasterCard here, they sure seem to not want to say who initiated this or why they wanted the $50 million. They just kept talking about their investment into cybersecurity. And so it leads one to wonder, well, what was the terms of the agreement here? Like, what happened? So that's what this motion gets towards. And, I think it's a reasonable ask here, and it's not a fishing expedition. It's called accountability. And given the large amount of money that this government seems to be shoveling out so blindly, it won't surprise me that next week there'll be a whole nother issue that comes up here that we're going to have to take a look at, because it happens over and over again with these guys. It never seems to end. They never seem to learn their lesson. So I don't know. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Mr. Area.
I carefully listened to Mr. Perkins and Mr. Patzer. I did not find any valid reason why we should go ahead with it. I completely agree with Mr. Garron, and he put it so eloquently, as you said, a standard that I can never achieve in my life. But every point he made is quite valid. If there is any improper administration in giving this grant or support to MasterCard, or for that matter, any other organization, I would certainly support that we look into it in depth and to find the truth about it. But here, it is just a matter of time, wastage of our time, the committee's time, and the government's work. If probably the objective of this motion is to gum up the government's work, the bureaucrats' work, that the government can't function. Maybe that is the objective, like what we see that happening in the House of Commons. Probably the same objective is over here.
Thank you, MP Area. J'ai Caron, suivi Mme Rempel-Garner et Monsieur Van Bynen.
Mr. Caron, Ms. Rempel-Garner, and Mr. Van Byner. Mr. Chair, and I'm glad that Mr. Bachrach has been able to join us. I'd like to say that I appreciate Mr. Massey's amendment.
Une source de raison au sein du comité. Je pense certainement que
I think Mr. Massey is a source of reason within the committee, and I think he certainly did improve on the additional motion. It's difficult to be against this amendment. This said, however, Mr. Chair, I'm still wondering how I'll vote on this, and for the following reason. The argument underlying says that there must be something behind that $50 million given to MasterCard. There must be a reason behind it. What Mr. Turnbull has said, and I don't know how to express it in French, but he's trying to put together a bootstrap argument to explain why there was this $50 million. And I don't know if this is true or not. I was not in the room at that time, but the idea is to say that there was an agreement with Visa and MasterCard, and with the credit card company. In exchange, we have given this handout, and then they're saying that the government is corrupt, etc. There's no suspense here, and I don't love the Liberal government. I'm not a big fan. But the announcement of this investment of some 500 something million, this announcement was done when in the government. Was it back in January? January 2020. So a $500 million investment, it's not something that you decide in a second between Christmas and New Year's Eve. It means that this had been prepared back in 2019, 2018, 2017. And then, once the investment has been made, and once the money came in 2023, suddenly there's an agreement with Visa and MasterCard. And then, and again, if you persuade me that this was the case, that this $50 million in subsidy was used to offset to compensate MasterCard for that agreement, I'm ready to be convinced. However, if I read the schedule correctly, that would be impossible. The agreement came years after, in 2023, whereas this project was designed in 2018, 2019. It was before the pandemic. It was in the previous world. I'm going to vote for the amendment. The amendment is fine. As I indicated, we've removed the element of a popular court, etc. But the history that I'm being told, which would make me vote in favor, well, look, it's like saying the earth is flat, there's no gravity. But if you convince me that it is possible and it's plausible and that we don't follow the law of physics, I might consider it. But for the time being, I am unable in my own mind to believe that the least possibility that the story could be true.
Madam Rempel-Garner.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, as committee members, we have the fiduciary responsibility to examine the government's expenditures. That's not a partisan thing. It's actually a privilege we have as members. So in previous testimony, we did question MasterCard on the need, why they needed $50 million from the federal government when they are literally one of the most profitable companies in the world, and their profits come off of, frankly, charging nearly usury rates to the average consumer. And here we have federal tax dollars going to MasterCard. So there better have been a good reason for that. And as my colleagues have said, under testimony, that reason wasn't particularly compelling. And it was something that lack of compellingness was something that transcended political boundaries. Now, pardon me for being a skeptic, but when my colleague from the Liberal Party says, oh, no, it totally created jobs and everything was on the up and up, there has been so much scandal in this government already. And he said it himself in his comments. If we scrutinized every transaction, wow, we couldn't possibly do that. And that's because there has been so many scandals. So given that MasterCard, like the parliamentary secretary is defending MasterCard, giving $50 million to MasterCard, problem number one. If there's nothing to hide, then the amended motion should present no problems for the government. But I just want to also underscore something for my colleague in the Bloc and in the NDP as well. The government predicated its argument that it needed to give $50 million to MasterCard, one of the most profitable, biggest corporations in the world, because that was the only way they were going to open up a cybersecurity center in Canada. But guess what? In May, in Belgium, what did MasterCard do? They opened up the exact same thing without what? Government handouts. Now, why is that? Why is that? I would love to know. And going back to the beginning of my speech, here, colleagues, we have the right and responsibility to ask for documents. This is all government documents on the rationale as to why the federal government, the federal bureaucracy, thought it was a great idea to give $50 million of tax dollars to one of the most profitable companies in the world. I think that is a great use of time. I really do. I would love to know the thinking behind this, because $50 million, it might not be a lot to the Liberal government, but it's a lot to the people in my community. And I would like to know why the government gave it to MasterCard. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Van Bynen, suivi de Monsieur Garon, suivi de
Mr. Van Bynen, followed by Mr. Garon. And Mr. Turnbull.
I think some of the things that we tend to overlook too easily is the fact that we're operating in a global marketplace. And the fact that MasterCard also opened up a center in Belgium tells me that they, sorry, I'll let you speak, and I don't interrupt you, Michelle, so please don't interrupt me. So when we take a look at other centers being established, if that type of an incentive makes Canada an attractive place for the investment, then I think that's a good investment. In fact, it creates jobs for Canadians. It creates all sorts of benefits in terms of developing technology. And we find it all too easy to overlook that just because of a ripe opportunity to smear success, to smear an organization that makes money. Are we going to smear General Motors? We did smear Chrysler, didn't we? Someone did because of their success when they started to build a battery factory. So are we going to focus on creating such a toxic environment for investment in Canada that people don't want to invest here? Are we going to create an environment where people would rather go elsewhere? And to me, that's a shame. The intent of the incentive was to create jobs in Canada, to create technology in Canada, and we're not doing Canadians a service by dragging every investment through the mud for political purposes. It's just not productive, and it's not the kind of thing that creates an environment that people will be investing. Money is liquid. It can go around the world in a flash, and that's just one example. So we need to make sure that we create an environment that continues to be an attractive area to invest.
Merci, Monsieur Garon, suivi de Monsieur Turnbull.
Mr. Garon, followed by Mr. Turnbull.
Je comprends que c'est passé
Well,
beaucoup de choses en Belgique.
I understood that a lot of things have taken place in Belgium. As the colleagues tell us, there were investments, there was an analytics center there. I'm not questioning the strategy or the intentions of Visa and MasterCard with respect to establishing a center that services all of North America. It is part of a trade secret and strategic decisions, but Belgium isn't like Visa in the United States. It's not the same. Well, that's the issue I have with this, because we're always saying there must be something there because it does exist. So when I was listening to the conservative argument, they're saying our job is to check the expenditures, and there was an expenditure. And since there was one, because it is a Liberal government, it's crooked and it's suspicious because there's an expenditure. You really couldn't run after your own tail more than that. It means that every time there will be an expenditure, it will be suspicious because it will be the Liberals, so something must be behind it because they're an expenditure, and we'll always run around after our own tail because there was an expenditure. Am I a great follower of this handout? Frankly, well, that has yet to be analyzed. But do I believe that given the rationale I was given to justify, to go and search emails and to spend all of our committee time on that, to date, have I been convinced? Well, the more we speak about it, the more I think it's a fishing expedition. Once again, and I would like to emphasize to the members of the committee for this subject today, we had to let go the representatives of the CFIB that represent tens of thousands of members. They had been ready to answer parliamentarians' questions. We had other witnesses who also had to leave today, and exactly for that reason. So when I look at this timing, as I mentioned earlier, that is from the time that the investment was announced, and then there were agreements with Visa and MasterCard. If they're offended, well, they're correct. Well, if that's the rationale for having fired them, they're correct. And I'd say that's fine, Mr. Chair, for the amendment, until, however, I have been shown that there's sufficient reason to believe that the government technically might have bought that agreement with that $50 million. If you can prove to me that in 2023 happened before 2020, well, good luck. Yes, fine. I'll vote in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Monsieur Garon, Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Garon. Mr. Turnbull.
I'm not defending MasterCard at all. I'm defending the project and the funding for the project, which I think if this committee is going to scrutinize every R&D investment that the government has made, I mean, I know when Ms. Rempel-Gardner was the minister, she gave $300 million to SDTC, which is interesting. So, you know, for me, I don't hear the Conservatives wailing and upset when the federal government funds R&D development for the oil and gas industry to do carbon capture, utilization, and storage. They never make a peep, not a single sound. So why this? Why now? I can only speculate that it has to do with their partisan games. So it's certainly, they're trying to weaponize this in some way. I'm not exactly sure how it benefits them exactly, but That seems to be the intent. It's baked right into the motion in terms of its partisan language, which has been cleansed a little bit, but I still think it's just a waste of resources. I agree with my colleagues that this gums up the work of government, and that making investments to attract MasterCard in this case to do their research and development and innovate here in Canada. I note that cybersecurity in 2022, Canadians lost just over $530 million to fraud and cyber schemes, which, according to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, is an increase of from $338 million in 2021. So that's a really significant jump in the amount of cybersecurity fraud that it leads to direct losses from Canadians. According to Jeff Horncastle, acting client and communications outreach officer for that organization, Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, this only represents the population who reported their losses. So there's lots of people that would be embarrassed by having, been subjected to one of these scams, such that there's severe underreporting. And he estimates the figures only cover up to 10% of the actual losses. And here's the kicker for me, and I know Mr. Guérin cares about seniors. We also estimate, they say, that 20% of those people who reported losses were seniors. So just think about that, $530 million in fraud and cyber schemes. So that's more than... So we invested $50 million as a government to attract $510 million of MasterCard investment to protect Canadians against $530 million in fraud. Like, to me, it suggests that perhaps there's a need for more cybersecurity and a focus on cybersecurity to protect our seniors. So I happen to think that this investment is a good one. I don't see how it's a good use of our community resources and time to go on a fishing expedition here. I totally get that, the committee's job and opposition's job is to hold the government accountable. I get that, and we all have that power and ability, but this is just a random selection. Like, I'm sure the Conservatives will come up with another one. If this one doesn't pass, they'll just have another one tomorrow or later this week. I'm sure they'll have another one. And so we just see this repeatedly. I just think it's a waste of time and resources. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I have MP Rempel Garner next, and finally Mr. Badaway. As a reminder to colleagues, we're still on the amendment. Mr. Perkins, did you want to be added to the list or nope? Okay. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think it is curious that the federal government for 9 years has not moved on things like interchange fees, that they didn't formally regulate that they haven't moved on open banking. And I think that there is a lot of curiosity about why the government hasn't moved more aggressively when our peer nations and peer jurisdictions already have. It's odd to me. And then on top of that, it's odd that the government would give $50 million to a massively profitable company when they probably don't need to. So, I think that the timing is curious. I think that the lack of regs, based on all of the testimony that we've heard to date on this study, is curious. And I think this information may help us determine whether or not that curiosity is founded or not. A $50 million contribution to a large company is odd, like this, especially when they were likely going to do this anyways. So I just think that there's, after all the testimony we've seen on this credit card study, there are a lot of questions that have been raised about why the federal Liberal government has not moved. on certain issues. My colleague from the NDP, Mr. Massey, raised this study, which I think has brought up a lot of questions that it's incumbent upon this committee to answer. And I feel like getting a little bit more background on the government's rationale and conversations on this contribution might shed light on the broader issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other, unless Mr. Badaway, I think you didn't want to speak. Okay, so we are done with speakers on the amendment. I suggest we put it to a vote. I think we've heard it all. So, Madam Clerk, let's put the amendment that Mr. Massey has proposed that you received to a vote.
Mr. Turnbull.
Oppose.
Mr. Aria. Mr. Badaway. Monsieur Gahir. Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Généreux.
Wait.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel Gardner.
Yes.
Mr. Garon.
Oui.
And Mr. Bachrach.
Yes.
Alors, l'amendement est adopté. Ça nous ramène à la motion telle qu'amendée.
The amendment passes. This brings us back to the motion as amended. On my list regarding the main motion, I have Mr. Aria, Ms. Rempel Gardner, and Mr. Massey, and Mr. Garon, and Mr. Badaway.
Okay, Monsieur Aria, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Chair. And as I mentioned previously, if there is any prima facie evidence or suggestions that things were not done properly, things were not done according to the standards set when awarding grants like this, we should not proceed. And secondly, as Mr. Van Bynen said, we have to make extraordinary efforts to have leading edge technologies be developed in Canada. The advantages we had as a country because of the natural resources that is getting eroded in the knowledge-based economy. We have to convince various companies in technology sectors to use Canada as the base for their innovation, for their research and development, so that Canada continues to remain at the forefront of this knowledge-based economy. If we start indulging in the thing that this motion proposes, that will put Canada in a not favorable picture when it comes to major international companies considering investing in technological developments within Canada. MasterCard, I believe, has invested this in Vancouver. For them, it's very easy to cross the border and invest the same thing in Seattle. So these are the kind of opportunities I think we should, in fact, we have to encourage more companies like MasterCard to invest in technological development within Canada. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Aria.
Thank you, Mr. Aria. Ms. Rempel Gardner, Mr. Garon, Mr. Bachrach, and Ms. Badaway.
I said my piece on the amendment, and so my comments stand. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Garon. You have the floor on the motion. Let me say out loud what I was going to say to Mr. Perkins in private, because the public knows this now. In my mind, it's not simply a motion requesting the production of documents. We're not simply requesting documents because you have them and you're entitled to ask for documents. Because when you begin, and I understand it's MasterCard, and I know that it's the least pitiful company on earth, that I understand. But when you begin behaving like this without having reasonable grounds to assume that something irregular occurred, what message are we sending to companies who negotiate with us? Some negotiate with the governments of the province of Quebec and elsewhere. So what message are we sending to those companies who we try to get? And I think it's important. And without defending anybody, I'm simply wondering about this. Now, I understand that the reasoning of the Conservatives is once again to say, well, of course, for 9 years, or after 9 years, we've heard this a great deal. It's become almost a children's song. After 9 years, it could be a song. Of course, they had never regulated, and suddenly they set up the center, and suddenly they tolerate an agreement rather than legislation. So, Mr. Chair, where does this end? Let me give you an example. So today, the federal government has announced a ceiling for industrial emissions, a maximum. So again, are you telling me that now that we have this maximum, and that's up until 2030, but now that they've announced this threshold, does that mean for the next 5-6 years, we will be closely watching every single subsidy to companies that emit something in Canada and to try them on the basis of having received a subsidy, so that we're trying to see whether or not these people have received some kind of grant in exchange for another policy? So when you cast the net so wide, at a certain point it becomes almost like we're complicit. It's almost a plot. So if we're trying to force a government, let's say we're the government, we want to force the government to produce the documents, I'm saying, where does this stop? If that is our minimum standard, to request documents, if the threshold is so low, why not ask for governments for all companies that do business with Canada to have a huge list? So what I'm saying is that maybe I have misunderstood the Conservatives' intention, but at this point, I am not convinced that what we're doing is in the public interest in this motion. And with this motion, I'm not convinced that it'll stop here and that will be the only time when we do this. So for the time being, I have not changed my mind. Thank you, Mr. Garon. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Bachrach, followed by Mr. Badaway, by Rempel Gardner. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for allowing me to join you on this interesting topic, a topic I'm somewhat new to. I'm inclined to support the motion as amended, and I don't think it has to do with any assertion that there's been impropriety on the part of the government in making this contribution. It's more an interest in getting to the bottom of this question around how the government decides that certain contributions are necessary to attract investment, and what level of contribution is deemed necessary to keep those investments in Canada. I think every dollar beyond the value that is actually required is a dollar that's wasted. It's a handout to profitable corporations that don't need public money. And so I do think getting some insights into how the government made this particular decision when it comes to handing MasterCard $50 million would be very useful. As was mentioned by my Conservative colleague, if MasterCard is making similar investments in other jurisdictions without these kind of handouts, it implies that actually those subsidies aren't required in order to attract that investment. So I do think it's a topic worthy of inquiry. My colleague, Mr. Guérin, raises a good point, which is that there are many, many contributions at this level that the government makes to corporations, and we can't dig into all of them necessarily. But, digging into this one, because on the surface, at least, it does seem like a lot of money to be giving to a credit card company, perhaps would provide some insights into how the government makes these kinds of decisions. Is there some sort of a sense of a threshold or an amount that the government's willing to invest to attract a few hundred jobs to Canada and $500 million in investment? So I'm inclined to support the motion with the caveat that I take Mr. Guérin's point, which is that there isn't really a prima facie case that something improper has taken place in terms of legal impropriety, and that there are a lot of other contributions at this level. I do think it would be worth getting some more insight into how the government made this decision and whether indeed it was necessary. Maybe MasterCard was going to set up shop in Vancouver, regardless of whether it got 50 million public dollars. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to support the motion on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Massey. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. No, Monsieur Badaway.
Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll start off by saying this. Although I do support or appreciate a lot of the comments that are being made, as well as from Mr. Perkins in terms of the amended motion. One, the motion I want to make very clear is being allowed because of the study that we're doing today on credit cards and being discussed because of that study. Secondly, a study, Mr. Chairman, that is ongoing with which I have a great deal of interest in, especially as it relates to some of the following points I'm about to make. For example, points and questions that we're expected to be answered by CFIB today. And then following which three, and this is a point I want to underline in bold, a process of which, while we embark on this study and complete the study, and the interests as well as the outcomes from the witnesses and additional witnesses that we'll receive, that other directions that can be taken, like the one Mr. Perkins is suggesting today. I guess add to that, Mr. Chairman, and what I was very much interested in today from CFIB, and I'm somewhat disappointed that we never got them for the rest of the meeting, are issues such as, and focusing on issues that impact our small businesses. Issues that, quite frankly, I would assume that MasterCard will be embarking on with respect to their interests with small businesses with some of the dollars that they receive from the federal government. Dollars, I might add, that was applied for through a program. And let's face it, when dollars are applied for a program, the matrix kicks in. And if they are successful, it's based on the criteria that they applied and how they applied, regardless of who they might be and what their balance sheet might say. But I want to kick back to some of the interests that I had today, and unfortunately I wasn't able to get those answers from CFIB that pertain to what we're actually discussing right now. For example, economic support and relief. What specific measures with this money and or organizations like the CFIB believe would be most effective in helping small businesses and individuals recover from recent economic hardships, including inflation and interest rate hikes. Workforce development and skills shortage. What would these dollars be going toward, or in terms of organizations like CFIB, to address the skills gap within small businesses, and what support is available to help employers attract and retain talent? Advocacy and policy priorities. What do some of these dollars go toward, or what would CFIB or some of the witnesses today consider as a top priority in terms of their policies for the coming year? Are there any legislative changes that might come out of this process, or these partnerships and these discussions in terms of advocating for and providing to immediate relief for, again, small businesses and individuals? Some of the comments that were already made with respect to digital transformation and innovation, how would some of this money attach to, and or once again the witnesses give testimony for, support to small businesses in adopting digital tools and technology to stay competitive, especially given the rapid evolution of e-commerce, Mr. Chairman, and digital marketing. Environmental and social responsibility in the context, Mr. Chairman, of sustainability. And how does companies like MasterCard or other companies that are part of this process with respect to this sector, CFIB once again included, and other witnesses, support small businesses and Canadians in transitioning to greener practices? Are there specific resources or grants other than the one that MasterCard has received to help with sustainable transformations? When it comes to healthcare and employee well-being, what is again these partners' stance on expanding healthcare and benefits or mental health resources for small business employees, and how might this be achieved, Mr. Chairman? Supply chain, which is my favorite, supply chain resilience. How are partners and again witnesses giving testimony to support small businesses affected by supply chain disruptions? And what strategies does it recommend to improve resilience?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, when it comes to... One second,
I'm sorry.
by the way, there is a point of order.
Just a time check. I think we only have 3 minutes left. If the Liberals are finished talking, then we could have a vote. If not, we'll have to deal with this again at the next meeting.
Well, I'm afraid it's not just the Liberals. I have Mr. Patzer and MP Rempel-Garner that I have on my list, but we are nearing, and Mr. Turnbull, so as you know, the rules are so made that until we've exhausted the list of speakers, and I've got a few Conservatives, a few Liberals, we can put it to a vote. That being said, it is 5:30, and as interesting as was your speech, Mr. Badaway, we'll have to pick it up from where you left it, because, colleagues, the meeting is adjourned.